This dance means nothing. The Duke pulled her closer. Tell that to my mother watching. The Harrington ball blazed with 1,000 candles, their light catching the crystals of the chandeliers and scattering diamonds across the cream-coloured walls. Violet Ashby pressed herself deeper into the shadow between a marble column and an enormous arrangement of hothouse roses, watching the dancers swirl past in a blur of white muslin and military scarlet. She had perfected this position over countless such evenings, visible enough to satisfy propriety, invisible enough to avoid notice. It suited her perfectly. From her vantage point, she could observe the entire ballroom without participating in its absurdities. There was Lady Helena Whitmore, making her third desperate circuit of the room in hopes of catching Lord Ashby's eye. There was Mrs. Drummond Burrell, holding court among the patronesses and deciding which hopeful young ladies would receive Almack's vouchers and which would be consigned to social obscurity. There was the usual cluster of fortune hunters circling the Bancroft heiress like well-dressed vultures, their practised compliments audible even from across the room. The marriage mart in full display. Violet found it both fascinating and faintly nauseating. "You're hiding again?" Violet did not startle at her aunt's voice. Millicent Ashby had a gift for appearing precisely when least wanted, trailing disapproval like expensive perfume. "I am not hiding," Violet replied mildly. "I am providing moral support from a strategic distance." "You are lurking behind the roses like a particularly well-dressed garden gnome." Aunt Millicent settled beside her with a rustle of lavender silk, her fan moving in the precise rhythm that indicated severe displeasure. "I did not drag us both across London in that wretched hired carriage so you could catalogue the wallpaper." "The wallpaper is quite fine. Chinese silk, if I'm not mistaken. The Harringtons have done well for themselves this season." "Violet." The single word carried a weight of exhaustion that made Violet's chest tighten with familiar guilt. Her aunt had sacrificed much to give her a home after her father's death had opened her modest widow's residence to a grieving girl with nothing but a trunk of clothes and a mountain of her father's debts. 8 years later, Violet remained a burden, a mouth to feed, a body to clothe, a responsibility that should have ended with a wedding and never had. "I am sorry, Aunt." Violet touched the older woman's arm gently. "But we both know there is nothing for me here. I am 24, without fortune or connection. The gentlemen are not exactly forming a queue. Because you hide behind the roses. I hide behind the roses because the alternative is standing in the open being pitied." Violet kept her voice light, but the words scraped her throat like broken glass. "I would rather be invisible than pathetic." Aunt Millicent's fan paused its rhythm. Her hand, soft and spotted with age, covered Violet's. "You are not pathetic, child. You are merely stubborn as a mule and twice as likely to bite." Despite herself, Violet smiled. "I learned from the best." "Indeed you did. Now come. Lady Harrington has set out the most extraordinary arrangement of ices, and I intend to sample every variety before the evening ends. If we must be here, we may as well eat." Violet allowed herself to be led toward the refreshment table, though she maintained her careful trajectory along the room's edges. 8 years of practice had taught her exactly how to move through a ballroom without catching anyone's eye, a slight lowering of the chin, a softening of the posture, a purposeful blankness of expression that rendered her utterly forgettable. She had been memorable once, a lifetime ago, when her father still lived and her dowry still existed, and a golden-haired young man had looked at her like she hung the stars. Charles Weatherton, third son of the Earl of Ashbury, with his poet's eyes and his easy promises and his talent for making a 16-year-old girl believe in fairy tales. The engagement had lasted 6 months. The public dissolution of it had taken approximately 6 minutes, Charles announcing at Lady Pemberton's musicale that he could not in good conscience bind himself to a woman of such reduced circumstances, his regret as practised as his sonnets, his escape as swift as his interest had been. Violet had learned several valuable lessons that evening. Hope was dangerous. Love was a luxury. And invisibility, once mastered, was the finest armor a woman without fortune could possess. Miss Ashby, I require your attention." The voice was imperious, aristocratic, and completely unfamiliar. Violet turned to find herself face to face with a woman of perhaps 60 years, dressed in an alarming shade of purple that somehow managed to be both fashionable and defiant. Diamonds dripped from her ears and throat. Her eyes, sharp and grey as winter ice, fixed on Violet with an expression of profound impatience. "You there?" The woman gestured with a fan that probably cost more than Violet's entire wardrobe. "Fetch me a lemonade. This one has gone warm." Violet blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Lemonade. Cold. With a touch of champagne if you can manage it without causing a scandal. Quickly now. I haven't got all evening." Ah. Understanding dawned. The purple gown, the commanding manner, the utter certainty that anyone in her orbit existed to serve her needs. This was clearly a woman of significant rank who had mistaken Violet for a hired companion, or perhaps a servant who had wandered above stairs. It was not the first time. Violet's gowns, though clean and respectable, were clearly dated. Her lack of jewels spoke volumes about her circumstances, and her position on the margins of the ballroom only reinforced the impression that she did not truly belong among the guests. A wiser woman would have simply fetched the lemonade. A wiser woman would have lowered her eyes, murmured assent, and disappeared into the crowd. Violet, unfortunately, had never been particularly wise. "I'm afraid I cannot help you with the lemonade," she said pleasantly. "I am a guest, not a servant. Though I understand the confusion, this gown is at least 3 seasons old, and I'm told it makes me look rather like a governess who has wandered into the wrong party." The grey eyes widened. For a terrible moment, Violet thought she had made a catastrophic error, had offended some duchess or marchioness who would have her thrown from the ballroom and banished from polite society forever. Then the woman laughed. It was not a delicate, ladylike titter. It was a genuine, startled bark of amusement that drew looks from nearby guests and made Violet's aunt turn from the ice table with an expression of deep alarm. "Oh, that is marvellous!" The woman pressed a jewelled hand to her chest, still chuckling. "A young woman with a spine. I had begun to think they'd stopped making them entirely." "We are in rather short supply," Violet agreed cautiously. "Budget cuts, I believe." Another laugh, this one drawing even more attention. The woman studied her with new interest, taking in the dated gown, the modest pearl earrings, the hair that was already escaping its pins despite Violet's best efforts. "I am the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield," the woman announced, as though conferring a gift. "You may call me your Grace when in company, and Eleanor when we are alone, which we shall be often if I have anything to say about it." Violet curtsied, her mind racing. The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield. She had heard the name. Of course, everyone had. Eleanor Ashworth was legendary in London society, famous for her sharp tongue, her scandalous opinions, and her decades-long campaign to see her remaining son married to anyone remotely suitable. "Miss Violet Ashby," she replied. "I would offer you a title in return, but I'm afraid I haven't got one." "Will spinster niece of a baron's widow suffice?" "It will do nicely." The dowager tucked her arm through Violet's, as though they were old friends. "Now, Miss Ashby, you will accompany me to that settee by the windows, and you will tell me exactly why you are hiding behind the roses when you ought to be dancing." "I was not hiding." "You were absolutely hiding. I noticed you 20 minutes ago, pressed between that column and the floral arrangement like a particularly reluctant bookend. It was most impressive. Tell me, is it natural talent, or have you practiced?" Violet found herself being towed across the ballroom by a woman nearly twice her age and 3 times her consequence. Guests parted before them like the Red Sea before Moses, which was apt the Dowager Duchess had something of the prophet about her, if prophets wore purple silk and enough diamonds to blind a small army. A bit of both, Violet admitted, giving up any pretense of resistance. I find balls rather exhausting, and my dancing skills are not such that the world suffers from my absence on the floor. Nonsense. I saw your feet, they are perfectly adequate. The Dowager deposited them both on a small settee with a view of the entire room. The problem is not your dancing. The problem is your attitude. You have decided you do not belong here, and you have made it so by sheer force of will. The observation struck rather closer to the bone than Violet would have liked. She arranged her skirts carefully, buying time to compose a response. I find that expectations, when set low enough, can never disappoint, she said finally. It is a rather restful way to live. It is a cowardly way to live. The Dowager's words were sharp, but her eyes had softened with something that looked uncomfortably like understanding. I should know. I spent the first 5 years of my widowhood hiding in a country estate, convinced that my life had ended with my husband's. It took my son nearly dying of a fever to shake me back to sense. I am sorry for your loss. It was 20 years ago, child. The grief has worn smooth with time, like a river stone. But I remember what it felt like to convince myself that safety was the same as happiness. The Dowager patted Violet's hand with unexpected gentleness. It is not, Miss Ashby. It is not even close. Violet had no idea how to respond to this startling intimacy from a woman she had known for all of 5 minutes. Fortunately, she was spared the necessity by the arrival of a footman bearing 2 glasses of champagne, which the Dowager accepted with a regal nod. Now, the older woman pressed a glass into Violet's hand. Tell me what you read. What I read? Books, Miss Ashby. Do try to keep up. I can assess a person's character in moments if I know their literary preferences. It is a talent I have cultivated over many years. Violet took a sip of champagne, considering. I read rather widely. Novels, when I can get them. Miss Austen is a particular favorite, though I suspect everyone says that. History, especially anything touching on the Romans. Philosophy when I am feeling ambitious and want to give myself a headache. Poetry when I am feeling melancholy and want to make it worse. Excellent answers. The Dowager looked genuinely pleased. And what do you think of Fordyce's sermons? I think they are useful primarily as a remedy for insomnia. The Dowager laughed again, loud enough that several nearby matrons turned to stare. Oh, I like you, Miss Ashby. I like you very much. It has been an age since I met a young woman who says what she thinks instead of what she believes I wish to hear. I find that saying what I think tends to shorten conversations considerably. It is quite efficient. Efficient and honest. 2 qualities in desperately short supply among the current crop of debutantes. The Dowager's eyes swept the ballroom with an expression of profound dissatisfaction. Have you seen them? Giggling and simpering and pretending to be stupid because they believe it makes them more attractive. It is enough to make one despair of the entire generation. To be fair, Your Grace, they are behaving exactly as they have been taught. Society does not generally reward women for intelligence. Society is a fool, and you may call me Eleanor when we are speaking privately. Violet nearly choked on her champagne. I could not possibly. You can and you will. I have decided we are to be friends, Miss Ashby, and I do not stand on ceremony with my friends. The Dowager Eleanor fixed her with a pointed look. Do you have any objection? Several, but I suspect none of them will matter. Clever girl. You are learning already. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the dancers execute a complicated country set. Violet felt oddly untethered. as though the evening had slipped sideways into some alternate reality where powerful duchesses befriended invisible spinsters and served them champagne on velvet settees. "He is late," Eleanor muttered, her eyes fixed on the ballroom entrance. "He is always late. It is a pointed commentary on his opinion of social obligations, and I refuse to find it charming." "Who is late?" "My son, the current Duke of Thornfield. May his stubborn soul find peace some day. He promised to make an appearance tonight, which means he will arrive at the last possible moment, speak to exactly 3 people, and leave before the supper dance." Eleanor's fan resumed its rhythm of agitation. "He has been like this for 3 years. 3 years of watching him freeze into marble while I am powerless to stop it." Violet recognized the particular flavor of helpless love in the older woman's voice. She had heard it often enough from her own aunt. "I'm sure he has his reasons. He has grief and guilt, which he has fashioned into armor so thick that nothing can penetrate it. Not my concern, not his friends' worry, certainly not the parade of eligible young ladies I have placed in his path." Eleanor's voice dropped, losing its imperious edge. "His younger brother died 3 years ago. A duel, of all the idiotic, wasteful things. Sebastian blamed himself, still blames himself, though there was nothing he could have done. He arrived too late to stop it, held Edward as he died." "That is terrible." Violet meant it. She knew something about grief, about the way it could hollow you out and leave nothing but echoes. "I am sorry. As am I. Every day I am sorry. Sorry that I could not save one son, and sorry that in losing Edward I have lost Sebastian as well." Eleanor straightened, visibly collecting herself. "But enough melancholy. This is meant to be a ball, not a funeral. Tell me about your situation, Miss Ashby. You live with your aunt, you said." The change of subject was transparent, but welcome. Violet answered the dowager's questions about her circumstances, her father's death, the gambling debts that consumed her dowry, her aunt's generosity in providing a home with practiced brevity. It was not a story she enjoyed telling, but Eleanor listened without pity or judgment, merely nodding at appropriate intervals. "And you have never considered marriage?" Eleanor asked when Violet finished. "I have considered it extensively. I have concluded that it is not available to women in my position, except as a transaction I am unwilling to make." Violet set down her empty glass. "I will not marry for security alone. I have seen too many women trapped in loveless matches, growing bitter and grey while their husbands seek happiness elsewhere. I would rather remain a spinster than become a convenience." "A romantic," Eleanor smiled. "I would not have guessed." "Not romantic, merely stubborn. There is a distinction." "Is there? I have never been entirely certain." Eleanor's attention suddenly fixed on the ballroom entrance, her entire posture sharpening. "Ah, finally. The prodigal son deigns to appear." Violet followed her gaze and felt the air leave her lungs. The man entering the ballroom moved like a storm approaching dark, contained, inevitable. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in evening clothes of such severe elegance that they seemed almost aggressive in their perfection. His hair was dark and slightly too long, curling against his collar in defiance of fashion. His face was striking rather than handsome, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth set in a line that suggested smiling was a skill he had long since abandoned. But it was his eyes that caught Violet's attention and held it. Grey, like his mother's, but colder, harder. The eyes of a man who had looked at the world and found it wanting. "Sebastian Ashworth, Duke of Thornfield," Eleanor murmured, though Violet had already guessed. "The Marble Duke, they call him. He would be flattered if he cared enough to notice." The Duke cut through the ballroom with brutal efficiency, acknowledging greetings with the barest nods, deflecting conversational attempts with a raised eyebrow that seemed to physically push people away. He moved like a man trying to complete an unpleasant task as quickly as possible. When he reached their settee, he bent to kiss his mother's cheek with mechanical precision. "Mother, you look well." "I look furious, which you would notice if you bothered to actually see me." Eleanor's tone was tart, but her hand reached up to touch his face briefly. "You are late." "I am here. I believe that was the requirement." "The requirement was that you arrive at a reasonable hour, mingle with society, and make at least a cursory effort to pretend you are not miserable." Eleanor gestured toward Violet with her fan. "You will also greet my companion properly. This is Miss Ashby, the most sensible young woman I have encountered in 3 seasons, and you will treat her with appropriate respect." The grey eyes turned to Violet. She had expected them to slide over her, to dismiss her with the same indifference he had shown everyone else. Instead, they paused, assessed, catalogued her dated gown, her modest pearls, her hair escaping its pins, found her wanting. The judgment was swift, silent, and utterly clear. Miss Ashby was nobody, a poor relation, a charitable project of his mother's, someone who occupied space without deserving attention. His bow was perfunctory, the kind offered to servants who had briefly risen above their station. "Miss Ashby." 2 words, her name and nothing more. Then he looked away, returning his attention to his mother, as though Violet had already ceased to exist. Something hot and unexpected flared in Violet's chest. Not embarrassment, she was long past that. Not hurt, she had armored herself against such slights years ago. No, this was anger, pure and bright and startling. How dare he? How dare this cold, arrogant man look at her as though she were furniture? She had not asked for his attention, had not angled for his notice, had been perfectly content in her invisibility until his mother dragged her into the light. And now he dismissed her like a tradesman presenting an unsatisfactory bill. She said nothing. Of course she said nothing. A woman in her position did not confront a duke, no matter how badly he deserved it. But she felt her spine straighten, her chin lift, her hands curl into fists in the folds of her unfashionable skirts. Eleanor, who missed nothing, looked between them with sudden interest. "Sebastian," she said, in a tone that made the Duke's jaw tighten, "I have just had the most marvelous idea." "Mother, the next set is beginning. A waltz, I believe. You will dance it with Miss Ashby." The words fell into silence like stones into a frozen pond. Sebastian went rigid. Violet felt her blood turn to ice. "I do not dance," Sebastian said flatly. "As you well know. You have not danced. There is a distinction." Eleanor's voice carried with perfect clarity across the nearby guests, several of whom had turned to watch with undisguised fascination. "But Miss Ashby is a delightful young woman who deserves a partner, and I am tired of watching you lurk about the edges of ballrooms like a particularly elegant vulture." "Mother, this is neither the time nor the place." "It is precisely the time and precisely the place. Unless you wish to publicly refuse and humiliate both me and this young lady, you will offer her your arm and lead her to the floor." Violet wanted to disappear, wanted the polished parquet to open beneath her feet and swallow her whole. She could feel the stares of the surrounding guests, could hear the whispers beginning to spread. The marble duke being forced to dance by his mother. And with a nobody, a poor relation, a woman whose name meant nothing to anyone. The humiliation was worse than Charles Weatherton. At least Charles had pretended to care before he destroyed her. This was naked manipulation, performed before an audience, with Violet as an unwitting prop. She opened her mouth to refuse propriety be damned. She would not be used as a pawn in whatever game the Dowager was playing. But Sebastian spoke first. "Very well." His voice was ice and iron, his expression carved from stone. He extended his hand toward Violet without looking at her. "Miss Ashby, if you would." It was not a request. It was barely even a concession. It was a man choosing the lesser of two humiliations and making certain she knew it. Violet should have refused. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to decline gracefully, to claim a turned ankle or a headache, to remove herself from this absurd situation before it spiraled further out of control. Instead, she rose, placed her hand in his, felt the shocking warmth of his palm against hers, even through their gloves. "Thank you, Your Grace." She kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. "How fortunate that I was available to satisfy your social obligations." His eyes snapped to hers, a flicker of surprise breaking through the marble mask. Had he expected her to simper, to blush and stammer and thank him for the condescension? He did not know her at all. The walk to the dance floor felt endless. Guests parted before them, whispers following in their wake like the train of a wedding gown. Violet kept her eyes forward, her chin high, her hand steady in Sebastian's grip. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. When they reached the floor and turned to face each other, Sebastian's expression was thunderous. "This dance means nothing," he said, his voice low and tight. "Regardless of what my mother hopes." He pulled her closer than propriety allowed, his hand firm against her back. The music swelled around them, and they began to move. "Tell that to your mother watching," Violet replied, matching his quiet tone. "She is practically weeping with joy. I believe she has already begun planning the wedding." Sebastian's step faltered infinitesimally. "You are impertinent." "I am honest. There is a distinction." Violet met his grey eyes steadily, refusing to look away. "But please, do continue to explain to me how this dance means nothing. I find it very convincing, especially the part where you are holding me rather closer than is strictly necessary." His jaw tightened, his hand flexed against her back, but he did not move away. "You are not what I expected," he said finally. "You expected nothing at all." "I was furniture to be tolerated until you could escape." Violet felt the anger still burning in her chest, bright and fierce and utterly inappropriate. "Tell me, Your Grace, does it come naturally, the ability to look at a person and see nothing, or did you have to cultivate it?" "Miss Ashby, I am no one of consequence. I understand that perfectly well. I do not require a duke's attention or approval, but I am still a person, and I deserve the basic courtesy of being acknowledged as one." She was speaking too freely, she knew. The champagne, the shock, the accumulated frustration of 8 years of invisibility, it all poured out of her in a hot, unstoppable stream. "Your mother was kind to me. She saw me when no one else did. And you waltzed in with your expensive tailoring and your frozen face and dismissed me as though I were a particularly uninteresting piece of furniture." Sebastian stared at her. The marble mask had cracked. Just slightly she could see confusion beneath it, and something else she couldn't identify. "I did not intend." "Of course you did not intend. Men like you never do. It simply does not occur to you that the invisible woman in the dated gown might have thoughts, feelings, opinions." Violet smiled, sharp as glass. "But she does, Your Grace. She has quite a lot of them, in fact. And right now, most of them are centered on how quickly this interminable dance will end." The music swirled around them. Other couples flowed past, bright and laughing, oblivious to the battle being waged in their midst. Sebastian led her through the steps with mechanical precision, his body moving on instinct while his mind clearly struggled to process what had just happened. "You are angry," he observed. "How observant. And you are taking it out on me rather than my mother, who orchestrated this entire farce. Your mother is lonely and desperate to see you happy. Her methods may be questionable, but her motives are pure." Violet executed a turn with unnecessary sharpness. "You, on the other hand, are cold and dismissive for no reason at all, except that you have decided the world does not deserve your notice. You know nothing about me. I know that your brother died 3 years ago, and you have been punishing yourself ever since. I know that you attend these events only because your mother demands it, and you make certain everyone knows how much you despise being here. I know that you have built walls so high and so thick that no one can reach you, and you think that makes you safe, when really it just makes you alone." The words hung between them, brutal and honest, and far too intimate for a first meeting. Violet felt the blood drain from her face as she realized what she had done. She had just dissected a duke's private grief in the middle of a ballroom, using information his mother had shared in confidence. "I am sorry," she whispered, her anger collapsing into horror. "That was unforgivable. I should not have. I had no right." "No." Sebastian's voice was strange, almost hoarse. "No, you did not." The music ended. Around them, couples separated, applauding politely. Sebastian released her with excessive care, as though she might shatter, or perhaps as though he might. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Ashby." His voice had recovered its cool formality, but his eyes were different now. Darker, more present. Something had shifted behind the marble, and Violet could not tell if it was better or worse. He bowed. She curtsied, and then he turned and walked away, cutting through the crowd without a backward glance. Violet stood frozen on the dance floor, her heart pounding, her thoughts in chaos. What had she done? What had she said? Years of careful invisibility, destroyed in a single dance by her wretched, uncontrollable temper. She did not know that across the ballroom the Dowager Duchess was watching with an expression of profound satisfaction. And she did not see Sebastian pause at the door, turn to look back at her one final time, and leave the ball hours earlier than he had planned. The morning after the Harrington ball dawned grey and damp, London's usual indifferent greeting to a new day. Violet lay in her narrow bed in her aunt's modest townhouse, staring at the water stains on the ceiling and contemplating the various ways her life had become complicated in the space of a single evening. "You danced?" Aunt Millicent appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, her grey hair wild about her face. "You danced with the Duke of Thornfield. You, Violet Ashby, who has not danced in 8 years, waltzed with the most eligible bachelor in England." It meant nothing. Do not be absurd. It meant everything. The gossip columns will be full of it by afternoon. Her aunt advanced into the room, eyes blazing with an excitement Violet had not seen in years. The marble duke, dancing for the first time since his brother's death, and with an unknown young woman of modest means. There will be speculation. There will be interest. There will be nothing. Violet sat up, pulling her wrapper around her shoulders. "He danced with me because his mother forced him. He despised every moment of it. And She broke off, remembering. "I may have been somewhat less than diplomatic during the experience." Aunt Millicent's excitement curdled into alarm. "What did you do?" "I told him he was cold and dismissive and built walls to keep everyone away." Violet dropped her face into her hands. "Among other things." Silence. When Violet looked up, her aunt had gone white. "You criticized a duke to his face." "While dancing. It seemed like a good idea at the time." "It was an absolutely terrible idea." Aunt Millicent collapsed onto the edge of the bed. "Violet, darling, I love you dearly, but your mouth has always been your worst enemy. How could you possibly think that insulting the Duke of Thornfield would end well?" "I did not think. That was rather the problem." Violet pulled her knees to her chest, feeling very young and very foolish. "He looked at me like I was nothing, Aunt. Like I did not exist except as an inconvenience. And something in me just snapped." Her aunt's expression softened. She reached out to stroke Violet's tangled hair, the gesture as familiar as breathing. "You cannot fight the entire world, darling. I know it seems unfair, it is unfair, but you must learn to swallow these slights. For your own protection, if nothing else. I know. Violet leaned into the touch. I know. I will apologize if I ever see him again, which I probably will not, because he will certainly avoid any event where I might be present. Aunt Millicent's hand stilled. That may not be as easy as you hope. What do you mean? Before her aunt could answer, the doorbell rang. Violet frowned. They did not receive callers at this hour, did not receive callers at all except for the occasional tradesman or her aunt's few elderly friends. Footsteps on the stairs. Their maid of all work, Martha, appeared in the doorway with wide eyes and a silver tray bearing a single card. "Miss Violet," Martha breathed. "There's a duchess downstairs, in our parlour, an actual duchess." Violet looked at the card. The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield, it read. At home, Thornfield House, Mayfair. Her heart sank into her slippers. "Tell her I am not feeling well," she said desperately. "Tell her I have died. Tell her—" "You will tell her nothing of the sort." Aunt Millicent was already on her feet, pushing Violet toward her wardrobe. "You will dress appropriately, go downstairs, and discover what the Dowager Duchess wants. And you will be polite, Violet, gracious, demure. Aunt, now." 20 minutes later, Violet descended to the parlour in her second-best morning dress, a pale blue muslin that was only 2 seasons old instead of 3. Her hair was pinned with ruthless precision. Her hands, hidden in the folds of her skirt, were trembling. Eleanor Ashworth sat in their best chair as though she owned it, which she possibly did. The chair, the house, half of London, who could say with duchesses? She looked completely at ease despite the modest surroundings, her purple pelisse bright against the faded upholstery. "Miss Ashby," Eleanor smiled like a cat who had discovered the cream pot. "How delightful to see you again. Please, sit. We have much to discuss." Violet sat. There did not seem to be any alternative. "I must apologize for last night," she began. "I was rude to your son, and You were magnificent." Eleanor waved away the apology like an irritating fly. "I have not seen Sebastian so thoroughly rattled since he was 12 years old, and his pony threw him into a duck pond. It was extraordinary. I insulted him. You challenged him. There is a distinction." Eleanor's eyes gleamed. "For 3 years, everyone has tiptoed around Sebastian like he is made of glass. Poor thing, they whisper. Such a tragedy, such grief. They let him freeze and withdraw and slowly turn to marble because they are too frightened to demand more of him. And you think I demanded more? I think you looked him in the eye and told him he was behaving like an ass, in so many words." Eleanor leaned forward, her expression sharpening. "Miss Ashby, my son is dying. Not physically, his body is perfectly healthy, but his spirit, his soul, whatever you wish to call it, that has been fading since the day his brother died. And no one except me seems to care enough to stop it." Violet felt her throat tighten. "Your Grace." "Eleanor." "Eleanor." The name felt strange on her tongue. "I understand your concern for your son. Truly I do. But I am not the person to help him. I am a spinster of no consequence, with no fortune and no connections. I have nothing to offer a duke except apparently an inability to hold my tongue. You have exactly what he needs, someone who sees him as a man instead of a title." Eleanor reached into her reticule and produced a folded document. "Which is why I wish to hire you." The world tilted slightly. "I beg your pardon?" "As my personal companion, for the remainder of the season." Eleanor held out the document, a formal letter of employment, Violet realized, complete with terms and salary and signatures awaiting only her own. "The compensation is generous. You would live at Thornfield House, attend social events with me, and assist with my correspondence and household management. It is respectable work for a gentlewoman in reduced circumstances." Violet stared at the letter. The salary listed was more than she could earn in 3 years of teaching or governess work. More than enough to repay her aunt for years of support, to set aside something for the future, to achieve a measure of security she had long since abandoned as impossible. "You want me to live in your house," she said slowly, "to see your son daily, to be constantly in his presence." "Precisely. Because you hope that proximity will somehow—" "What? Melt his frozen heart? Make him fall in love with a plain spinster in outdated gowns?" "I hope that proximity will remind him he is alive." Eleanor's voice softened. "Miss Ashby Violet, if I may, I am not attempting to orchestrate a romance. I am too old for such foolishness, and Sebastian is too stubborn. But I watched you last night, watched you stand up to him, watched you refuse to be invisible. And I thought, that is what he needs. Someone who will not let him retreat. Someone who will challenge him to feel something, even if that something is irritation. He will hate me, probably, for a while." Eleanor smiled, gentle and sad. "But at least he will feel it. At least something will penetrate that terrible armor. And perhaps, just perhaps, it will be the first crack in the wall." Violet looked at the letter again, at the salary that represented freedom, at the signature line that represented chains of another kind entirely. She thought of her aunt, growing older and more tired every year, of the narrow bed in the small room that had been her entire world for 8 years, of the careful invisibility that kept her safe and also kept her from living. She thought of Sebastian Ashworth's grey eyes, the flicker of something beneath the marble, the way his hand had felt against her back, the shock in his face when she had challenged him. She thought of all the reasons this was a terrible idea, and then she picked up the pen. Thornfield House rose from Mayfair's elegant streets like a monument to old money and older power. Violet stood before its imposing facade 3 days later, her modest trunk beside her, her heart beating a rhythm of absolute terror in her chest. "You can still change your mind," Aunt Millicent said. She had insisted on accompanying Violet, though whether for support or to witness the spectacle remained unclear. "Say you are ill. Say there has been a death in the family. Say anything at all." "I gave my word." Violet straightened her shoulders. "And more importantly, I deposited the first month's payment in your account this morning. I am afraid you are committed to my foolishness now." Her aunt made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Promise me you will be careful." "I am always careful." "You are never careful. It is your worst quality and your best." Aunt Millicent pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Write to me, often, and if that man hurts you in any way, I shall march into his house and murder him with a butter knife." "Noted." The door opened before Violet could knock, a butler of such imposing dignity that he made the house look modest, materializing to take her trunk. "Miss Ashby." His voice was as starched as his collar. "Her Grace is expecting you, if you will follow me." The interior of Thornfield House was everything Violet had expected and nothing she had prepared for. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, artwork that probably cost more than her father had lost in his entire gambling career. Every surface gleamed with quiet wealth, every corner whispered of centuries of power. She was led to a morning room done in shades of green and gold, where Eleanor waited with tea already poured. "You came." The Dowager Duchess actually looked surprised. "I was not entirely certain you would." "I gave my word." "Yes, but words are easily broken. I have found that promises made to duchesses are particularly fragile. People tend to forget them the moment they realize what they have agreed to." Eleanor gestured to a chair. "Sit, drink. We have much to discuss before dinner." Over the next hour, Violet learned the rhythms of her new life. She would have a suite of rooms in the family wing, near Eleanor's own chambers. Her duties would include managing Eleanor's correspondence, accompanying her to social events, overseeing certain household matters, and though this was never stated explicitly, providing companionship to a lonely old woman who had outlived too many people she loved. "The servants will respect you because I do," Eleanor said. "The ton will whisper about you because they always whisper. Sebastian will ignore you because he ignores everyone. None of this will be pleasant, but you will survive it. You paint such an appealing picture. I am honest. You said you valued honesty." Violet could not argue with that. "There is one other matter." Eleanor's voice had grown careful, which immediately raised Violet's suspicions. "Sebastian does not know you are coming." The teacup in Violet's hand suddenly felt very heavy. "I beg your pardon?" "He has been at his club since the ball. I have not had the opportunity to inform him of the new arrangements." Eleanor had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "He will discover your presence at dinner this evening." "You invited me into your home without telling your son?" "Thornfield House is my home as well as his. I have every right to hire staff and invite guests." Eleanor's chin lifted in a gesture Violet was coming to recognize. "Besides, if I had told him, he would have found some excuse to prevent it. The boy is remarkably inventive when it comes to avoiding things that might help him." Violet set down her teacup with elaborate care. "Eleanor, Your Grace, you have just informed me that I will be ambushed at dinner by a man who already dislikes me, who will now discover that I have invaded his home without his knowledge or consent. Do you understand why this concerns me? I understand that it will be uncomfortable. I also understand that discomfort is sometimes necessary." Eleanor reached across to pat Violet's hand. "Trust me, child. I have been managing Sebastian since before he could walk. I know what I am doing." Violet was not remotely reassured. The hours until dinner crawled past like wounded soldiers. Violet explored her rooms lovely, far finer than anything she had known since childhood, and tried to read, tried to rest, tried to prepare herself for the coming storm. At 7 o'clock, a maid arrived to help her dress. At 8:30, she was led to the dining room. At precisely 7:45, she heard footsteps in the corridor and knew her time had run out. Sebastian Ashworth entered the dining room still dressed for riding, his cravat loose, his hair windswept. He looked tired and irritated and utterly unprepared to find Violet Ashby seated at his table. For a long moment, no one spoke. Sebastian stood frozen in the doorway, his grey eyes fixed on Violet with an expression of complete incomprehension. Eleanor sipped her wine with an air of studied innocence. Violet contemplated the various ways one might die of embarrassment. "Mother," Sebastian's voice was very quiet, very controlled, very terrifying. "Why is Miss Ashby in our dining room? She is my new companion. Did I not mention that?" Eleanor's smile was beatific. "She arrived this afternoon. I thought it would be lovely to have young company for the season. You did not mention it. How careless of me. I have been so scattered lately. Age, I suppose." Eleanor patted the chair beside her. "Come, sit. Cook has prepared that lamb dish you enjoy." Sebastian did not sit. He stood in the doorway, staring at Violet, his jaw working as though physically restraining himself from saying something he would regret. "Miss Ashby." The words came out clipped, precise, dangerous. "I was not informed of your appointment." "I can see that." Violet rose from her chair, meeting his eyes despite the terror clawing at her throat. "I apologize for the surprise. It was not my intention to—" "No, I imagine it was not." His gaze cut to his mother. "This is your doing, your manipulation. I will not be managed, Mother." "I am not managing you. I am hiring staff. There is a distinction." "A distinction?" Sebastian's laugh was harsh and humorless. "You invited the one woman in London who—" He broke off, shaking his head. "No, this is not acceptable. She cannot stay here." The words hit Violet like a physical blow. She had expected resistance, displeasure, awkwardness. She had not expected to be dismissed so completely, so immediately, so thoroughly. Something in her face must have shown the impact, because Sebastian's expression flickered a moment of something that might have been regret before the marble closed over it again. "I mean no offence to Miss Ashby personally," he said, the words stiff as his posture. "But this arrangement is inappropriate. She is a young, unmarried woman. I am an unmarried man. There will be talk." "There is already talk." Eleanor's voice had hardened. "There has been talk since the ball, when you danced with her for the first time in 3 years. A few more whispers will change nothing." "It will change everything. The gossip columns are already speculating about a romance. Let them." Eleanor rose from her chair, drawing herself up to her full height. "I am tired, Sebastian. Tired of watching you turn to stone. Tired of the endless parade of simpering girls you refuse to notice. Tired of the silence and the grief and the walls you have built around yourself." Her voice cracked slightly. "You are my son, my only remaining child, and you are killing yourself by inches, and I cannot bear to watch it any longer." The silence that followed was devastating. Violet wished she could disappear, could melt into the wallpaper, could be anywhere except standing between mother and son, while years of grief and love and frustration spilled into the open. Sebastian's face had gone white. His hands, clenched at his sides, trembled slightly. "Mother." His voice was barely a whisper. "Please." "No." Eleanor crossed to him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "No more please. No more patience. Miss Ashby is staying. You do not have to like it. You do not have to speak to her. But you will tolerate her presence in this house, because I am asking you to, and because I am your mother, and because I love you more than anything in this world." For a long moment, they stood frozen, the indomitable old woman and her broken son, love and grief tangled together into something neither could escape. Then Sebastian closed his eyes, drew a breath, and nodded once. "Fine." The word was barely audible. "She may stay." He turned and walked out of the dining room without looking at Violet again. Eleanor watched him go, her face crumpling briefly before she composed herself. When she turned back to Violet, her smile was too bright, her eyes too glassy. "Well?" She returned to her chair, reaching for her wine with a hand that shook slightly. "That could have gone worse." Violet sat back down, her legs too unsteady to support her. The lamb waited on her plate, untouched and growing cold. Across the table, Eleanor drank deeply. "I should leave," Violet said quietly. "He does not want me here. I am only making things worse." "You are making things different. That is not the same as worse." Eleanor set down her glass with deliberate care. "Sebastian has been stagnant for 3 years, frozen in place, refusing to move forward, refusing to heal. Any change, any disruption is better than the slow death he has chosen. And if he is right? If my presence only creates scandal and embarrassment? Then we will weather it together." Eleanor's eyes met hers, steady and sure. "I meant what I said, Violet. You are exactly what this house needs, what my son needs, whether he knows it or not." She smiled, softer now. "Trust me, this is not how the story ends." Violet wished she could believe her. But as she lay in her beautiful new bed that night, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, she could not shake the feeling that she had just stepped into a storm she was completely unprepared to survive. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck midnight. And in his study 3 floors down, Sebastian Ashworth sat in the dark, a glass of untouched brandy in his hand, thinking about a woman with russet hair and brown eyes that saw far too much, and wondering what exactly his mother had set in motion. The first week at Thornfield House passed in a careful dance of avoidance. Sebastian, true to his word, tolerated Violet's presence, which meant he acknowledged her existence with the barest nod when they crossed paths, and otherwise pretended she had ceased to be. It should not have stung. Violet had expected nothing more, and yet each dismissive glance, each conversation ended the moment she entered a room, each meal taken in his study rather than at the family table, each small rejection accumulated like stones in her chest, weighing her down with something that felt dangerously close to hurt. She threw herself into her work instead. Eleanor's correspondence proved extensive and chaotic. Years of letters stuffed into drawers without system or organization. Violet created order from chaos, filing, responding, cataloguing the dowager's social obligations with the precision of a military campaign. "You have a gift for this," Eleanor observed one morning, watching Violet sort through a stack of invitations. "My last 3 companions could barely manage their own bonnets, let alone my schedule. I have always enjoyed organizing things. It gives the illusion of control." Violet held up a gilt-edged card. "Lady Pemberton's musicale on Thursday. Do you wish to attend?" "God, no. Lady Pemberton's musicales are where joy goes to die." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Send regrets. Cite my health. I am developing a very convenient heart palpitation that should excuse me from the worst of the season's tedium." "And the Ashbury Ball on Saturday?" "That one we must attend. The Earl is an old friend of my late husband's, and his wife makes excellent gossip. Besides—" Eleanor's eyes glinted with familiar mischief. "Sebastian has already accepted. He cannot escape if we arrive together." Violet's pen paused over the acceptance. "I am not certain my presence at balls is helpful. The whispers have not died down since Harrington's." "The whispers will continue regardless. We may as well give them something interesting to discuss." Eleanor leaned forward, her expression softening. "You have been hiding again, child. I see you creeping through the halls like a ghost, trying to take up as little space as possible." "It will not do. I am trying to be unobtrusive. You are trying to be invisible. There is a distinction, and I do not care for either." Eleanor rose, smoothing her skirts with characteristic briskness. "Come, we are going to the library, and you are going to help me with a project I have been avoiding for 3 years." The Thornfield Library occupied the entire east wing of the house, a vast cathedral of books rising 3 stories high, with a domed glass ceiling that flooded the space with natural light. Violet had glimpsed it during her initial tour, but had not yet ventured inside, sensing somehow that it was sacred ground. Now, standing in its centre, she understood why. "Edward's domain," Eleanor said quietly. "My younger son spent most of his life in this room. He was a scholar at heart, would have been happier as a professor than as a gentleman. After he died, I could not bear to enter. Everything remains exactly as he left it." The evidence of abandonment was everywhere. Books lay open on tables, their pages yellowed with age. Papers scattered across the great desk, held in place by dust. A coat hung over a chair back, waiting for an owner who would never return. "I need to sort through it," Eleanor continued. "His papers, his correspondence. There may be things of value, scholarly work he never finished, letters that should be returned to their writers. But I cannot do it alone. Every time I try, Her voice broke slightly. "I cannot. You want me to help you. I want you to do it for me, with me. I want to finally say goodbye to my son, and I need someone beside me who will not fall apart when I do." Violet thought of her father's study after his death, the creditors swooping in like vultures before she could salvage a single memento. She thought of the letters she had never read, the private papers she had never seen, the man she had barely known, rendered into nothing but debts and disappointment. "I would be honored," she said. They began that afternoon. Eleanor could manage only an hour at a time before the grief overwhelmed her, so they worked in short bursts, sorting papers, organizing books, slowly bringing order to the chaos of a life interrupted. It was during the third session that Violet found the letters. They were bundled together with a faded ribbon, tucked into a secret drawer in the desk that sprang open when she pressed an unassuming carved rose. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, clearly not Edward's own. "What have you found?" Eleanor looked up from the pile of scholarly notes she had been examining. Violet hesitated. The letters felt private, intimate, the kind of correspondence one did not share casually. But Eleanor was Edward's mother, and she deserved to know. "Letters, hidden." Violet held out the bundle. "They appear to be love letters, from the handwriting, signed only with an initial M." Eleanor's face went pale. She took the bundle with trembling hands, untied the ribbon, and read the first letter in silence. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with tears. "Margaret Hale," she whispered, "Lord Weston's daughter. Edward was in love with her, though he never told me. I suspected, but—" She pressed the letters to her chest. "She married another man, 2 months before he died. I always wondered if that was why he—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The duel that killed Edward Ashworth had been over a point of honour, the official story claimed. An insult that could not be forgiven, a challenge that could not be refused. But looking at Eleanor's face, Violet understood that the truth was far simpler and far more tragic. Edward had died because his heart was broken, and he had stopped caring whether he lived or died. "Does Sebastian know?" Violet asked quietly. "No. He believes Edward died defending some principle, some noble cause worth sacrificing himself for." Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "The truth is so much more pathetic. My brilliant, beautiful boy threw his life away over a woman who chose someone else. That is not pathetic. That is human. It is wasteful, stupid, unnecessary." Eleanor's voice hardened. "And Sebastian has been punishing himself for 3 years, believing he failed to save his brother from honour, when really he failed to save him from love." Violet thought about Sebastian's frozen exterior, his careful distance, his refusal to feel anything at all. If he blamed himself for not preventing a duel of honour, how much worse would he feel knowing the truth? That his brother had essentially committed suicide by proxy, and no one, not Sebastian, not Eleanor, not anyone had seen it coming. "You cannot tell him," she said. "I know." Eleanor tucked the letters into her sleeve. "I have been protecting him from this for 3 years, but I wonder sometimes if the lie is worse than the truth. At least if he knew, he might stop believing he could have prevented it. Or he might blame himself even more, for not seeing Edward's despair, for not being the kind of brother Edward could confide in." Eleanor looked at her with something like surprise. "You understand him, better than I expected. I understand grief, and guilt, and the stories we tell ourselves to survive them." Violet returned to the papers she had been sorting, needing something to do with her hands. "My father's death was not noble either. He gambled away everything we had, then drank himself into an early grave rather than face the consequences. For years I told myself he was ill, weak, a victim of circumstance. The truth is that he chose his escape over his daughter, and I have never quite forgiven him for it." The admission hung in the air between them. Violet had never told anyone the full truth about her father, not her aunt, not Charles, no one. The shame of it had been too great, the fear of judgment too overwhelming. But Eleanor simply nodded, as though Violet had confirmed something she already suspected. "We are all running from something," the Dowager said quietly. "The question is whether we run towards something better, or simply run until we cannot run any more." She rose, gathering her skirts. "I need air. Will you continue without me?" "Of course." Eleanor paused at the door. "Violet, thank you. for helping me with this, for—" She gestured vaguely at the room, at the letters in her sleeve, at the grief they had shared. "For being here." After she left, Violet sat alone in the library for a long time, surrounded by the remnants of a dead man's life, thinking about secrets and the weight of carrying them. She did not hear Sebastian enter. "What are you doing?" His voice came from the doorway, sharp with suspicion. Violet startled, nearly dropping the stack of papers in her hands. "Your mother asked me to help organize Edward's things." She kept her voice calm despite her racing heart. "I apologize if I am intruding." Sebastian stood frozen at the threshold, his face pale beneath its usual composure. His eyes swept the room, the sorted papers, the organized books, the evidence of disturbance to what had clearly been a shrine. "She should not have asked you to do this." His voice had gone hoarse. "She should not have touched anything. It has been 3 years, Your Grace. The work needed to be done, and your mother could not face it alone. Then I would have done it, eventually. She had no right. She had every right. He was her son." The words fell between them like stones. Sebastian flinched as though struck. "He was my brother." "Yes, and you have been avoiding this room for 3 years while your mother grieved alone." Violet rose, setting the papers aside with deliberate care. "I am sorry if our work has upset you, but pretending Edward never existed does not honor his memory. It only delays your healing." Sebastian crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping close enough that Violet could see the pulse jumping in his throat. His grey eyes were wild, almost desperate. "You know nothing about my healing, nothing about what I need. I know that you are angry, and that you are frightened, and that you have spent 3 years trying to feel nothing because feeling anything is too painful to bear." Violet held her ground despite every instinct screaming at her to retreat. "I know those things because I have done them too. You presume to compare your grief to mine? I presume to recognize a fellow sufferer when I see one." She met his eyes steadily, refusing to look away. "My father died 8 years ago. He left me nothing but debts and disappointment. For years, I was exactly where you are now, frozen, numb, convinced that the only way to survive was to stop feeling entirely." "And what changed?" The question surprised her. She had expected dismissal, not genuine curiosity. "I realized I was not surviving. I was merely existing." Violet's voice softened. "And existing is not enough. Not for me. Not for you. Not for anyone with a heart still capable of beating." Sebastian stared at her. The anger had drained from his face, leaving something raw and wounded in its place. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he turned and walked to the window, presenting his back to her like a shield. "Edward was better than me," he said quietly. "Kinder, gentler. He felt everything so deeply, every joy, every sorrow, every slight. I used to tease him about it, called him oversensitive, told him he needed to toughen up." Violet said nothing, sensing that interruption would break whatever fragile thing was forming between them. "The night before the duel, he came to me, tried to talk about something I do not even remember what now, and I was tired, distracted, impatient. I told him we would discuss it in the morning." Sebastian's voice cracked. "There was no morning, not for him, and I have spent 3 years wondering what he wanted to tell me, what I might have done differently, whether I could have saved him if I had only listened." "You could not have saved him. You do not know that. I know that people who are determined to destroy themselves will find a way, regardless of what those who love them do." Violet moved closer, stopping a few feet behind him. "I know that guilt is a poison that kills slowly, and I know that Edward would not want you to spend your life punishing yourself for his choices. Sebastian turned. His eyes were red-rimmed, his composure shattered. "How do you know what Edward would want?" "Because I have read his papers, his letters, his marginalia in 100 books." Violet gestured at the library surrounding them. "He was brilliant and loving and deeply, achingly sensitive. He felt things too much, cared too deeply, loved too hard. And the one thing that runs through everything he wrote is his adoration for his older brother. The brother he wanted to be like. The brother he was terrified of disappointing." The words hit Sebastian like physical blows. He staggered back, catching himself on the window frame. "No. Yes. Every letter mentions you. Every journal entry compares himself to you. He worshipped you, Sebastian. Not despite your coldness, but because of it. He thought you were strong in all the ways he was weak." Violet's own voice had begun to shake. If he could see you now frozen, grieving, destroying yourself over his death, it would break what was left of his heart. "Stop." Sebastian's voice was raw, ragged. "Please. Stop. I am sorry." Violet stepped back, suddenly aware of how far she had pushed. "I should not have I overstepped. Forgive me." She turned to leave, but his hand caught her wrist. The touch was gentle despite its desperation, warm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. "Do not go." 3 words, barely a whisper, but they held something that made Violet's breath catch. She turned back. Sebastian stood before her, stripped of armor, all his careful defenses crumbled to dust. The marble duke was gone. In his place was simply a man grieving, lost, desperately alone. "I do not know how to stop," he said. "The coldness, the distance. I have worn it for so long, I no longer remember how to take it off." "Then do not try to take it all off at once." Violet covered his hand with her own, feeling the tremor that ran through him. "Start with something small. One moment of feeling, one conversation where you allow yourself to be present. Like this one? Like this one." They stood there in the fading afternoon light, hands intertwined, the ghost of Edward's memory surrounding them like a benediction. Violet felt the weight of the moment, the fragile trust Sebastian had offered, the responsibility she had accepted. This was not what she had planned, not what she had wanted. She had come to Thornfield House expecting to endure, to survive, to earn her salary, and return to her aunt's modest home unchanged. Instead, she found herself standing in a dead man's library, holding the hand of a duke who had just shown her his broken heart. She was in terrible danger, and she knew it. But she did not let go. The Ashbury ball arrived with all the fanfare London society could muster. Carriages clogged the streets for blocks in every direction. Guests in their finest attire streamed through the doors, greeting acquaintances with the practiced enthusiasm of people who saw each other 3 times weekly, but pretended each meeting was a delightful surprise. Violet stood before the mirror in her chamber, trying not to panic. Eleanor had insisted on a new gown, a gift, she claimed, from her own modiste, though the workmanship and fabric suggested a price tag that made Violet's eyes water. The dress was deep rose silk, simple in cut, but elegant in execution, with delicate beading along the bodice that caught the light when she moved. She looked, for the first time in 8 years, like a woman who belonged somewhere. It terrified her. "Stop fidgeting." Eleanor swept into the room, resplendent in deep blue velvet. "You look beautiful. Accept it gracefully." "I look like an imposter." "You look like a woman who has finally been given proper clothing. The imposter is that terrible grey thing you arrived in." Eleanor adjusted a pin in Violet's hair with proprietary satisfaction. "Now, Sebastian is waiting downstairs. He has promised to behave civilly. Whether he manages it remains to be seen." "Sebastian." They had not spoken since the library. 3 days of careful avoidance, of eyes meeting across rooms and quickly looking away, of a new tension that crackled between them whenever they occupied the same space. Violet did not know what had changed. She only knew that something had. He was waiting at the foot of the stairs when she descended, dressed in evening clothes of severe black that made his grey eyes look almost silver. His face was the familiar marble mask, but his eyes tracked her descent with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. "Miss Ashby." He offered his arm with rigid formality. "You look well. You sound surprised. I am attempting a compliment. Allow me my awkwardness." Something that might have been a smile tugged at her lips. "Very well. Thank you, Your Grace. You look also well." Eleanor, climbing into the carriage ahead of them, made a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. The ride to the Ashbury mansion passed in charged silence. Violet was intensely aware of Sebastian beside her, the warmth of his body, the scent of his cologne, the way his hands stayed carefully folded in his lap as though he did not trust himself to let them wander. When they arrived, the crowd's reaction was immediate and intense. Whispers erupted as they entered, fans rising to cover speculating lips. The marble duke had emerged from his isolation not once but twice in a single season, and both times in the company of the same unknown woman. "Ignore them," Sebastian murmured, his hand settling at the small of her back. "They will tire of us eventually. And if they do not, then we shall give them enough material to keep them entertained for years." Before Violet could respond, they were swept into the receiving line, then into the ballroom, then into the whirlpool of social obligation that was a London ball. Eleanor vanished into a cluster of elderly friends. Sebastian was claimed by a succession of acquaintances who seemed determined to extract every detail of his unprecedented sociability. Violet found herself alone on the edge of the dance floor, watching the swirl of couples with something that felt dangerously like longing. "Miss Ashby, what an unexpected pleasure." The voice froze her blood. She turned to find Charles Weatherton smiling at her, as handsome and golden as he had been 8 years ago. His wife, a small dark-haired woman in pale pink, stood beside him with an expression of studied neutrality. "Lord Charles!" Violet was proud that her voice emerged steady. "How lovely to see you again." "The pleasure is mine, I assure you. You are looking remarkably well." His eyes swept her figure with an intimacy that made her skin crawl. "The Duke's household seems to agree with you. The Dowager Duchess is a kind employer. I am certain she is. And the Duke himself, is he equally kind?" The implication was clear and ugly. Violet felt her cheeks flush with anger rather than embarrassment. "His Grace has been perfectly proper, as have I. Unlike some, I do not confuse employment with impropriety." Charles's smile tightened. "Still sharp as a tack, I see. Some things never change." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Though I must warn you, the Duke is not what he appears. He is cold, Violet, cold and broken, and entirely incapable of caring for anyone. You would do well to remember that before you pin your hopes on him." "I have no hopes pinned on anyone. Unlike some, I learned that lesson years ago." She turned to leave, but Charles caught her arm. His grip was too tight, his smile too fixed. "I am only trying to help," he said, "for old time's sake. We were friends once, were we not?" "We were never friends, Charles. We were engaged. And then you publicly humiliated me because my father died poor." Violet pulled her arm free. "If you wish to help me, you may do so by staying as far away from me as possible." She walked away before he could respond, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. The encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Not because she still cared for Charles, that wound had long since scarred over, but because his words echoed her own fears. Sebastian was cold, broken, incapable of caring. She had seen glimpses of something more, had held his hand in the library while he wept, had felt the warmth beneath the ice. But what if she was wrong? What if she was seeing what she wanted to see, spinning hope from nothing, making the same mistake she had made 8 years ago? You look as though someone has walked over your grave. Sebastian appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. His eyes searched her face with something that might have been concern. I am fine. Violet accepted the champagne, grateful for something to do with her hands. Merely overwhelmed by the crowd. Liar. He guided her toward a quieter corner, his hand warm against her back. I saw you speaking with Lord Weatherton. What did he say? Nothing of consequence. Miss Ashby. Violet. The use of her name made her breath catch. Please, tell me. She looked up at him, at the grey eyes that held more warmth than she had ever expected, at the face that had become painfully familiar despite every effort to keep her distance. He warned me about you, she admitted, said you were cold and broken and incapable of caring for anyone. Sebastian's expression flickered. He is not wrong. I think he is. You think I am warm and whole and overflowing with affection? I think you are a man who has been hurt and who is terrified of being hurt again. I think the coldness is armor, not truth. Violet met his eyes steadily. I think you care far more than you want anyone to know. Sebastian was silent for a long moment. Around them, the ball continued its glittering chaos, but in their quiet corner, the world seemed to have shrunk to just the 2 of them. You see too much, he said finally. You hide too little. At least from me. Perhaps because you are the first person in 3 years who has looked at me as though I might be worth seeing. The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Violet felt something shift in her chest, a wall crumbling that she had not even known existed. Sebastian, dance with me. It was not a request. His hand extended toward her, steady and sure, and in his eyes was something that made her forget every sensible thought in her head. People will talk, she whispered. Let them. She placed her hand in his. The waltz that followed was nothing like their first dance. There was no anger, no defensiveness, no sharp words exchanged like weapons. Instead, there was only the music and the movement, and the impossible warmth of being held by someone who actually wanted to hold her. I am sorry, Sebastian said quietly as they turned, for how I treated you when you first arrived, for the coldness and the dismissal. You were protecting yourself. I was being a coward. His arm tightened around her waist. You terrified me from the moment we met. Still do. I terrify you. You make me feel things I had convinced myself I would never feel again. That is terrifying. His eyes met hers, grey and silver, and filled with something she was afraid to name. I spent 3 years becoming marble, and then you appeared, and suddenly I remember what it was like to be flesh. Violet's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could feel it. Sebastian, You do not have to say anything. I know this is impossible. I know there are 1,000 reasons why. He broke off, shaking his head. I just needed you to know that the walls are coming down, whether I want them to or not. The music ended. Around them, couples separated, applauded, began to reform for the next dance. Sebastian released her slowly, reluctantly, his hands lingering against hers. I should return you to my mother, he said, before the gossips expire from overstimulation. Probably wise. But neither of them moved. They stood frozen at the edge of the dance floor, hands still touching, the rest of the world reduced to background noise. "Miss Ashby?" A new voice intruded, smooth and cultured and immediately irritating. "Might I beg the honor of an introduction?" Violet turned to find a woman at her elbow, small, dark-haired, wearing the pale pink gown she had seen earlier. Lady Weatherton, Charles's wife. "Your Grace." Lady Weatherton curtsied to Sebastian with perfect propriety. "I apologize for the interruption. I was hoping Miss Ashby might join me for a brief turn about the room. There is a matter I wish to discuss with her." Sebastian's expression cooled. "I was not aware you were acquainted." "We are not, which is precisely why I wish to remedy the situation." Lady Weatherton's eyes met Violet's with something that looked almost like apology. "Please, it will only take a moment." Violet glanced at Sebastian, who gave a fractional nod. "I will find my mother. Join us when you are finished." After he left, Lady Weatherton guided Violet toward the windows, where the crowd was thinner and the air slightly cooler. "I must speak quickly. Charles will notice my absence soon." The woman's voice had lost its social polish, becoming urgent and real. "Miss Ashby, I need to tell you something about my husband. About what he did to you 8 years ago." "Lady Weatherton, please, call me Anne." She gripped Violet's hand with surprising strength. "I know what Charles told everyone, that you pursued him for his fortune, that you were devastated when your dowry disappeared, that he was forced to break the engagement because you had deceived him. That is what he told everyone, yes. It is a lie." Anne's voice was fierce. "All of it. I know because Charles has done the same thing twice since our marriage, pursued women for amusement, promised them love, then discarded them when something better came along." Her eyes glistened. "He is not capable of constancy, not capable of caring for anyone except himself. When your father died and your circumstances changed, Charles saw an opportunity to escape without blame. So he invented a story that made you the villain." Violet felt as though the floor had tilted beneath her feet. She had always known, somewhere deep inside, that Charles's version of events was distorted. But hearing it confirmed, hearing that her own instincts had been correct, was both validating and devastating. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw you with the Duke tonight, saw the way he looks at you." Anne's grip tightened. "And I saw Charles notice it too. He is jealous, Miss Ashby. Jealous of what you might have found. Jealous of happiness he can never achieve himself. He will try to destroy it, as he destroys everything good that crosses his path." "What do you mean?" "I mean that he will tell the Duke lies about you. The same lies he told everyone else. Amplified and twisted to cause maximum damage." Anne released her hand, stepping back. "I wanted you to be prepared, to know the truth before he poisons it. Anne, thank you. I cannot imagine what it cost you to tell me this." "It cost nothing. My marriage is already destroyed. My only satisfaction is preventing Charles from destroying anyone else." Anne's smile was thin and bitter. "Be careful, Miss Ashby, and be happy if you can. God knows some of us deserve it." She vanished into the crowd before Violet could respond. Violet stood frozen by the windows, her mind racing. Charles was going to lie about her to Sebastian. Was probably doing it already, spinning tales of fortune hunting and deception, poisoning whatever fragile thing had begun to grow between them. She had to find him, had to explain before the lies took root. But when she crossed the ballroom to where Eleanor sat among her friends, Sebastian was not there. "He stepped out," Eleanor said, frowning at whatever she saw in Violet's face. "Said he needed air. What has happened?" "Lord Weatherton, he is going to—" Violet could not finish the sentence. "I need to find Sebastian. Now." Eleanor's expression sharpened with understanding. "The terrace. 3rd door on the left. Go." Violet went. The terrace was empty except for two figures at the far end, silhouetted against the torchlight. Sebastian and Charles, standing far too close together, Charles's voice carrying on the night air. "Merely looking out for you, old friend. I know Miss Ashby seems charming, but you must understand her history. She targeted my family for years, angling for a proposal, and when she finally received one—" "That is enough." Sebastian's voice was ice. "I only want to spare you the embarrassment I suffered. The woman is a fortune hunter of the worst sort. She will say anything, do anything. I said that is enough." Violet stepped out of the shadows. Both men turned toward her, Charles with satisfaction, Sebastian with something she could not read. "Miss Ashby." Charles's smile was triumphant. "We were just discussing you." "So I heard." Violet kept her voice steady, despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Lord Weatherton has been sharing his version of our history, I assume." "His version?" Sebastian's eyes searched her face. "The version where I pursued him ruthlessly, deceived him about my circumstances, and was fortunate he discovered my true nature before the wedding." Violet lifted her chin. "It is a compelling story. Unfortunately, it is also entirely false." "Miss Ashby," Charles began. "8 years ago, Lord Weatherton pursued me," Violet continued, ignoring him. "He wrote me poems. He sent me flowers. He begged my father for permission to court me, then begged again for permission to propose. I believed him when he said he loved me. I was 16 years old and stupid with hope. This is absurd. When my father died and the debts were discovered, Charles faced a choice. He could honor his commitment to a woman without fortune, or he could escape without blame by making her the villain." Violet's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. "He chose escape. He chose to destroy my reputation rather than admit he was simply unwilling to marry a poor woman." Sebastian had gone very still. His eyes moved between Violet and Charles, reading something in both their faces. "You have no proof," Charles said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "I have the letters you wrote me, pages of poetry and promises, dated and signed in your own hand." Violet smiled grimly. "I kept them. Foolish of me, perhaps, but useful now. They paint a rather different picture than the one you have been sharing." Charles's face went white. "Those letters were private. They were lies. Lies written by a man who never intended to keep his word." Violet turned to Sebastian, her heart pounding. "I do not know what he has told you. I do not know what you believe. But I am asking you please to consider the source before you judge me." Silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Sebastian's expression was unreadable, his grey eyes reflecting the torchlight. Then he turned to Charles. "Leave." "Ashworth, leave now, or I will make you leave." Sebastian's voice was soft, dangerous. "And if I ever hear you speak Miss Ashby's name again to me, to anyone, I will destroy you, socially, financially, in every way that matters. Do we understand each other?" Charles's mouth worked soundlessly. For a moment, Violet thought he might argue. Then he turned and fled into the night. Sebastian watched him go, then turned back to Violet. His expression had softened, the ice melting into something that looked almost like tenderness. "You kept his letters." "I kept everything. I do not know why." Violet's voice was barely a whisper. "Perhaps some part of me always knew I would need proof someday. Or perhaps some part of you was not ready to let go. Perhaps." She looked up at him. All her careful defenses crumbled to dust. "Sebastian, I need you to understand I am not pursuing you for your fortune. I am not angling for a proposal. I came to Thornfield House for employment, nothing more. Whatever you may think." "I think," Sebastian said quietly, "that you are the most honest person I have ever met. I think that you have been wounded by people who should have protected you, and that you have built walls nearly as high as my own. And I think that despite every sensible instinct, I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and inevitable. "You cannot mean that," Violet whispered. "I mean it more than I have meant anything in 3 years." Sebastian stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I have been dead, Violet, frozen, convinced that feeling anything was too dangerous to risk. And then you appeared, and suddenly I remember what it means to be alive. Sebastian, you do not have to say anything. You do not have to feel the same way. I only needed you to know." He lifted his hand, cupping her face with heartbreaking gentleness. "Whatever happens next, I needed you to know." Violet closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. Her heart was racing, her thoughts in chaos. Everything she had believed about herself, about love, about the impossibility of happiness, all of it crumbled in the face of this man's impossible, terrifying, miraculous honesty. "I am falling too," she said. "I have been falling since the library, since you showed me who you really are." Sebastian made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, their breath mingling in the cool night air. "We are fools," he murmured. "Absolute fools. The ton will be scandalized. They will survive." He kissed her then, soft and tentative and achingly sweet. It was not a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of promise, of beginning, of two broken people finding something unexpected in each other. When they finally pulled apart, the noise of the ball drifted through the windows behind them, a reminder of the world they would have to face. "We should go back," Violet said reluctantly. "We should." Sebastian did not move. "Your mother will be wondering. My mother orchestrated this entire situation. She can wait 5 more minutes." Violet laughed a real laugh, bright and unguarded. Sebastian smiled in response, and the transformation was remarkable. Without the marble mask, he was handsome in a way that made her chest ache. "I want to court you," he said, "properly, with flowers and poetry and all the ridiculous rituals society demands. I do not need rituals, but I need to give them to you. I need to do this right." His hand tightened on hers. "Will you let me?" Violet thought about all the reasons she should refuse. The gossip, the scandal, the impossibility of a duke and a companion finding anything like lasting happiness together. Then she looked at Sebastian's face, at the hope and fear and love written plainly across his features, and she knew that refusing was no longer possible. "Yes," she said, "I will let you." They walked back into the ball together, hand in hand, and the whispers that erupted in their wake were the sweetest music Violet had ever heard. The week that followed was both the happiest and most confusing of Violet's life. Sebastian courted her with an intensity that left her breathless. Flowers arrived every morning, not the formal arrangements expected from a duke, but wild bouquets gathered from the Thornfield gardens, each accompanied by notes in Sebastian's cramped handwriting. He found excuses to be near her constantly, appearing in the library when she was organizing books, joining tea with his mother when he had never done so before, taking her on carriage rides through Hyde Park, where the ton could see and speculate. Eleanor watched it all with undisguised delight, making no effort to hide her satisfaction at the success of her machinations. "I told you," she said one afternoon, as they watched Sebastian attempt to teach Violet to play chess. "I knew from the moment I saw you that you were exactly what he needed. You could not have known this would happen. I knew there was potential. That was enough." Eleanor's eyes softened. "I have not seen him smile in 3 years, Violet. 3 years. And now he smiles every day." It was true. The marble mask had cracked, then crumbled, then disappeared entirely when Sebastian was with Violet. He laughed at her sharp observations. He debated philosophy and books and politics with genuine enthusiasm. He touched her constantly small, casual touches that made her pulse jump and her cheeks flush. They had not kissed again since the terrace. Some unspoken agreement held them back, an understanding that they needed to build a foundation before adding fire. But the wanting was there, humming beneath every interaction, growing stronger with each passing day. On Friday evening, Eleanor announced that she was retiring early with a headache, leaving Sebastian and Violet alone in the drawing room. "My mother is about as subtle as a cavalry charge," Sebastian observed, watching her theatrical exit. "She means well. She means to leave us unchaperoned." He moved to sit beside Violet on the settee, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I should probably be offended at the implication." "Should you?" "Probably." His hand found hers, intertwining their fingers. "I find I do not care." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the fire crackling, the house quiet around them. Violet felt a peace she had not known in years, a sense of rightness that settled into her bones. "Tell me something," Sebastian said quietly. "Something true. Something you have never told anyone." Violet considered. There were so many secrets she had kept, so many wounds she had hidden away. "I still have nightmares about Charles," she admitted finally. "Not about losing him. I stopped caring about that years ago. But about the humiliation. About standing in Lady Pemberton's musicale while he announced to everyone that I was not worthy of being loved." Her voice caught. "Sometimes I wake up convinced that everything good in my life is about to be taken away, that I will end up alone and invisible and forgotten." Sebastian's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "That will never happen," he said fiercely. "Not while I am breathing. You are not invisible, Violet. You are the most vivid, vital person I have ever known." "Sebastian, I mean it. Before you, I had forgotten what color looked like. The world was grey, all of it, grey and cold and pointless. And then you appeared with your sharp tongue and your brave heart, and suddenly everything had color again." Violet turned in his arms, looking up at his face. His eyes were bright, with an emotion that made her breath catch. "I love you," she whispered. "I did not want to. I tried not to. But I love you anyway." Sebastian's expression transformed, joy and wonder and something like awe flowing across his features. "Say it again." "I love you." Again. "Sebastian Ashworth, Duke of Thornfield, I am completely, hopelessly, ridiculously in love with you." Violet laughed, tears pricking at her eyes. "And I have no idea what to do about it." "I have some ideas," he murmured, and kissed her. This kiss was different from the first. There was heat in it, and hunger, and 3 years of frozen loneliness melting in the warmth of connection. Violet wrapped her arms around his neck and let herself fall, trusting him to catch her. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads pressed together, hearts racing in tandem. "Marry me," Sebastian said. Violet froze. "What?" "Marry me. Tomorrow. Tonight, if I can find a vicar willing to be woken." His hands cupped her face, urgent and tender. "I know it is too fast. I know we should wait, court properly, observe all the ridiculous rituals. But I do not want to wait. I want to spend every day of the rest of my life proving that you are worthy of love. Please, Violet, say yes." Her heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Yes, every instinct screamed. Say yes. Take the happiness. Grab it before it disappears. But another voice whispered caution. Too fast. Too soon. Too good to be true. "Sebastian." She pulled back slightly, needing space to think. "I want to say yes, more than I have ever wanted anything." "Then say it." But I am afraid. The admission cost her something. I am afraid that this is a dream, that I will wake up tomorrow and discover you have changed your mind. I will never change my mind. You cannot know that. A week ago, you could barely stand to be in the same room with me. Violet swallowed hard. What if this is merely infatuation? What if the feeling fades, and you find yourself trapped with a wife you no longer want? Sebastian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured. You want proof. I want time. Time to be certain. Time to build something that will last. She took his hands in hers. I love you. I believe that you love me. But I have been wrong before, and the stakes are too high to risk another mistake. She expected anger, disappointment, perhaps the return of the marble mask. Instead, Sebastian smiled. Then I will court you, he said, properly, for as long as you need. Sebastian, no, you are right. I have been so desperate to feel something, anything, that I nearly forgot the importance of building a foundation. He kissed her hands, one then the other. We have time, all the time in the world. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by guilt. I am sorry. I know this is not the answer you wanted. It is the answer I needed. Sebastian pulled her close again, tucking her head beneath his chin. My mother always says I am too impatient. Perhaps this is an opportunity to learn. They sat together in comfortable silence, the fire burning low, the future stretching before them full of possibility. For the first time in 8 years, Violet allowed herself to hope. The house party invitation arrived the following Monday. The Worthington estate, Eleanor announced, examining the gilt-edged card. Lady Worthington is an old friend. She hosts the most entertaining parties of the season, nothing too formal, plenty of time for walking and riding and one presumes courtship. She fixed Violet with a meaningful look. We shall all attend. It will do us good to escape London for a week. Sebastian, reading the newspaper across the breakfast table, did not look up. I have business in town. Your business can wait. You have not left London in 3 years. Eleanor's voice brooked no argument. You will escort us to Worthington Park. You will participate in the festivities, and you will remember what it feels like to enjoy yourself. Mother, this is not a request, Sebastian. Violet watched the exchange with amusement. She had come to understand the complex dynamics between mother and son, Eleanor's managing tendencies, Sebastian's reflexive resistance, the deep love beneath both. I think it sounds lovely, she offered. Fresh air, countryside, a break from the gossip mills. Sebastian's eyes found hers across the table. Something passed between them, understanding. Agreement, a shared acknowledgement that this was their chance to build the foundation they had discussed. Very well, he said. We will attend. Eleanor beamed with satisfaction. The journey to Worthington Park took the better part of a day, the carriage rolling through increasingly pastoral countryside until the estate's grand gates appeared before them. The house itself was impressive but comfortable, built for entertaining rather than intimidation. Lady Worthington greeted them on the front steps, all warm smiles and genuine welcome. Violet liked her immediately, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an easy manner, clearly more interested in her guests' comfort than their consequence. Miss Ashby. Lady Worthington clasped her hands warmly. Eleanor has told me so much about you. I understand you have been a great comfort to her. I hope so. And more than a comfort to young Sebastian, if the rumors are true. Her eyes twinkled. Do not worry, I approve entirely. He has been gloomy for far too long. The first days of the house party passed in pleasant rhythms. Morning walks through the manicured gardens, Afternoon entertainments in the drawing room, evening dinners that stretched late into the night, filled with conversation and laughter. Sebastian remained by Violet's side throughout, attentive without being suffocating. They played cards together, losing spectacularly to Eleanor and Lady Worthington. They explored the grounds, finding quiet corners where they could talk without interruption. They fell more deeply in love with each passing hour. On the third afternoon, they ventured further than usual, following a path through the woods until they reached a small folly overlooking a lake. The sky had been threatening rain all morning, and as they settled onto the stone bench inside, the first drops began to fall. "We shall be trapped here for hours," Sebastian observed, watching the rain intensify. "What a tragedy." "Indeed." He pulled her closer, her head settling naturally against his shoulder. "However shall we pass the time?" They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite books, dreams they had abandoned, and dreams they still harbored. Violet told him about her mother, dead since she was 5, remembered only in fragments of warmth and lavender scent. Sebastian told her about Edward, about the rivalry and love and guilt that still tangled together in his chest. "I have been thinking about what you said," he admitted, as the rain drummed against the roof. "About Edward choosing to destroy himself. About there being nothing I could have done. And I am beginning to believe you might be right." His voice was quiet, almost wondering. "For 3 years I have carried this weight, convinced that if I had only been better, faster, more attentive, I could have saved him. But Edward made his choice, and no amount of guilt on my part will change that." "It is not about forgetting him," Violet said gently. "It is about releasing yourself from the burden of his choice." "I know. I am trying." Sebastian turned to face her, his grey eyes soft with emotion. "You help, more than you know. I am glad." They kissed then, slow and sweet and tender. The rain continued to fall, cocooning them in their own private world. "I want to marry you," Sebastian murmured against her lips. "I know. But I will wait, as long as you need." Violet pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. The fear that had gripped her at his first proposal had faded, replaced by something that felt remarkably like certainty. "Ask me again," she said, "at the end of the house party, if you still feel the same way then." Sebastian's face transformed with hope. "Truly?" "Truly." They sealed the promise with another kiss, longer this time, deeper. The rain showed no signs of stopping. Neither of them minded. The final evening of the house party arrived too quickly. Lady Worthington had arranged a ball, nothing too formal, she assured them, just dancing and cards and a chance to celebrate before everyone scattered back to London. Violet dressed with unusual care, the rose silk gown that had become her favourite settling over her shoulders like armour. Tonight, Sebastian would ask again. Tonight, she would say yes. The certainty sat warm in her chest, undeniable now. She descended the stairs to find Sebastian waiting, devastatingly handsome in his evening clothes, his grey eyes tracking her every movement. "You are beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up reasonably well yourself." He laughed, that full, genuine laugh she had come to treasure, and offered his arm. The ball was everything Lady Worthington had promised. The musicians were excellent, the refreshments lavish, the company congenial. Violet danced every dance, her feet light, her heart lighter. When the waltz began, Sebastian claimed her without hesitation. "Do you remember," he murmured as they moved, "what I said the first time we danced? You said the dance meant nothing. I was an idiot. You were scared." Violet smiled up at him. "So was I. And now? Now I am still scared, but I am also ready." Sebastian's arm tightened around her waist. "Ready for what?" For whatever you want to ask me." The music swelled around them. Sebastian's eyes never left hers. "Violet Ashby," he said, his voice low and fierce, "will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The word rose to her lips, inevitable and right. "Yes." Sebastian's face transformed with joy. He stopped dancing entirely, pulling her into his arms right there in the middle of the ballroom, propriety be damned. "Yes," he repeated, as though he could not quite believe it. "Yes, you impossible man. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will spend the rest of my life arguing with you and loving you and—" He kissed her. Around them, the ball continued. Couples danced, conversations hummed, the world turned on its axis. But in the center of the floor, two broken people found something they had stopped believing in: each other. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Eleanor was watching from the edge of the dance floor, with tears streaming down her face. Violet met her eyes and smiled. The Dowager Duchess smiled back. And somewhere, perhaps, Edward Ashworth smiled too. The carriage ride back to London should have been triumphant. Instead, it was tense and silent, the joy of the previous evening evaporating like morning mist. They had been halfway home when the rider appeared, bearing a message that made Sebastian's face go white. He had read it once, twice, then folded it away without explanation, his expression settling into the marble mask Violet had not seen in weeks. "Sebastian." She reached for his hand. "What is it?" "Nothing that concerns you." The coldness in his voice stopped her breath. "Sebastian, I said it is nothing." He pulled his hand away, turning to stare out the window. "Leave it alone." Eleanor exchanged a worried glance with Violet, but said nothing. The rest of the journey passed in awful silence. At Thornfield House, Sebastian disappeared into his study without a word, leaving Violet standing in the entrance hall with her heart in fragments. "What happened?" she asked Eleanor. "What was in that message?" "I do not know." The Dowager's face was troubled. "But I intend to find out." An hour later, Eleanor appeared in Violet's chamber, her expression grave. The message was from Lord Wetherton, Charles. Violet's blood ran cold. "What did it say?" "I do not know the exact words, but Sebastian has shut himself away, and when I pressed, he said only—" Eleanor's voice broke. "He said he was a fool to believe anything good could happen to him." "No." Violet was moving before she realized it, out of her chamber, down the corridor, through the house to Sebastian's study. She did not knock. He was standing at the window, his back to her, rigid as stone. "Sebastian, look at me." "Go away." "Not until you tell me what Charles said." Silence stretched between them, thick with dread. "He sent proof," Sebastian said finally, his voice hollow. "Documents, letters, evidence that your father's debts were even worse than reported, that you knew about them before your engagement, that you pursued Charles deliberately to escape them. That is a lie." "Is it?" Sebastian turned, and his face was devastating, closed off, wounded, betrayed. "Are you certain there are no documents that could be interpreted that way? No letters to your father expressing concern about your circumstances?" Violet felt the ground shift beneath her feet. There were letters. Of course there were. Desperate letters from a 16-year-old girl watching her family's fortunes crumble, expressing fear about her future, hoping that marriage might provide security. But they had not been about Charles. They had been about survival. "I did not pursue Charles for money," she said firmly. "I loved him. Or I thought I did. Whatever letters exist, they have been twisted to—" "How can I know that?" Sebastian's voice cracked. "How can I know anything?" Charles says you targeted him. You say you did not, and I—" He pressed his hands to his face. "I cannot survive another betrayal, Violet. I cannot." "Sebastian, please." She stepped toward him, her heart breaking. "You know me. You know who I am. Whatever Charles has constructed, it is not the truth. I know what I want to believe. I do not know what is real." The words hit her like physical blows. After everything, the confessions, the vulnerability, the promises, he still doubted her, still could not trust. "Then perhaps we should not marry after all." The sentence fell into silence. Sebastian's head snapped up, shock replacing the anguish in his eyes. "What?" "If you cannot trust me, if, after everything, you can still believe I would deceive you, then what foundation do we have?" Violet's voice was steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. "I will not spend my life proving myself to a man who believes every whispered lie." "Violet, I told you the truth about Charles. I told you about my father, about my circumstances, about every shameful detail of my past. I gave you everything I had to give." She drew a breath that felt like broken glass. "And at the first test, you chose to believe someone who has already proven himself a liar." "I do not believe him." Sebastian's voice was ragged. "I do not want to believe him. But the documents— damn the documents!" Violet's composure finally shattered. "Documents can be forged, letters can be taken out of context, lies can be dressed up in evidence. But you know me, Sebastian. You know my heart. And if that is not enough, then nothing ever will be." She turned and walked out of the study. Sebastian did not follow. In her chamber, Violet packed her trunk with mechanical precision, tears falling unheeded onto her carefully folded clothes. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, white-faced and pleading. "Do not leave. Not like this." "I cannot stay." Violet closed the trunk with a decisive click. "I will not be treated as a suspect in my own life." "He is scared, Violet. He has been hurt so badly. I have been hurt too. That is not an excuse to hurt each other." Violet turned to face the woman who had become unexpectedly dear to her. "I love your son. I will love him for the rest of my life, but I will not marry a man who does not trust me. It would destroy us both." Eleanor's face crumpled. "Where will you go?" "To my aunt, where I should have stayed from the beginning." Violet crossed to her, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "Thank you for everything. You gave me hope when I had none. I will never forget that." She walked out of Thornfield House before dawn, her modest trunk carried by a bewildered footman, her heart in ruins. Behind her, in his study, Sebastian sat alone in the dark, Charles's documents spread before him, his mother's words echoing in his ears. "What have you done?" she had demanded, standing in his doorway with fury in her eyes. "What have you done to the only woman brave enough to love you?" He did not have an answer. He only knew that the warmth he had barely begun to feel had frozen over again, and this time the cold might never lift. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Violet stood at the window of her aunt's small parlour, watching the grey sheets of water descend upon grey London streets, turning everything to mud and misery. It seemed appropriate somehow. The world outside matched the landscape inside her chest, waterlogged, colourless, drowning. "You need to eat something." Aunt Millicent appeared beside her, pressing a cup of tea into her hands. "You have been standing at that window for hours." "I am not hungry." "You have not been hungry for 3 days. That is concerning behaviour for a woman who once ate an entire tray of biscuits because she was annoyed with the weather." Despite everything, Violet's lips twitched. "That was one time, and the weather was particularly offensive. This weather is also offensive, and yet you remain biscuit-free." Her aunt's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and solid. "Talk to me, child. Tell me what happened." Violet had not explained the full circumstances of her departure from Thornfield House. She had arrived at dawn, pale and silent, and Aunt Millicent had simply opened the door and let her in, asking no questions. But the questions were there now, hovering in the air between them, and Violet found she was too tired to keep deflecting. "I fell in love," she said simply, "and then I lost him." "The Duke?" "Sebastian." "Yes." Violet took a sip of tea, tasting nothing. "We were engaged for approximately 12 hours, and then Charles Weatherton sent him documents suggesting I was a fortune hunter, and Sebastian believed them, and I—" Her voice cracked. "I left." Aunt Millicent was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Did you give him a chance to explain?" "He had his chance. He chose to doubt me. After receiving what he believed was evidence of deception, after being betrayed by people he trusted before." Her aunt turned Violet to face her. "I am not defending his behavior, but I am asking whether you considered that his reaction might have been fear rather than disbelief. What difference does it make? All the difference in the world." Aunt Millicent cupped Violet's face in her weathered hands. "Fear can be overcome. Disbelief cannot. If he was merely frightened, if his doubt came from terror of being hurt again rather than genuine conviction of your guilt, then perhaps there is still hope. I cannot spend my life reassuring him. I cannot constantly prove that I am worthy of trust. No, you cannot. But you can forgive a moment of weakness from a man who has been wounded as deeply as you have." Her aunt's eyes were kind, knowing. "You left him, Violet, before he had a chance to recover from the shock, before he could choose correctly. He should have chosen correctly immediately. Should he? When Charles produced documents and evidence and spoke with the confidence of truth?" Aunt Millicent shook her head slowly. "I know you are hurt. I know his doubt felt like betrayal. But consider if someone had approached you with evidence that Sebastian was a fortune hunter, evidence that seemed compelling, documents that appeared legitimate, would you not have felt a moment of uncertainty?" Violet wanted to say no, wanted to insist that she would have trusted without hesitation, believed without question. But she knew herself too well for that kind of lie. "I might have doubted," she admitted, "for a moment. A moment is all he had. You left before he could recover from it." Her aunt released her face, stepping back. "I am not saying you were wrong to leave. I am saying you may have been too quick. And now you are standing at my window, watching the rain, and he is where? What is he doing right now?" Violet did not know. She had been so focused on her own pain that she had not considered his. "I cannot go back," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Cannot? Or will not?" Before Violet could answer, the doorbell rang. Martha's footsteps sounded in the hall, followed by muffled voices, and then the maid appeared in the parlour doorway with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Miss Violet, that is, the—" Martha took a breath, visibly collecting herself. "The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield is in the entrance hall. She is asking to see you." Violet's heart lurched. "Eleanor?" "She seems quite determined." Martha glanced over her shoulder nervously. "She also seems quite wet. Should I show her in?" Aunt Millicent was already moving toward the door. "Show her into the drawing room. I will have fresh tea brought." Eleanor Ashworth swept into the modest parlour like a ship making harbour in a storm, battered, determined, refusing to sink. Her purple pelisse was dark with rain, her silver hair escaping its pins, her face drawn with exhaustion. But her eyes burned with purpose. "Miss Ashby." She stopped in the centre of the room, dripping on the carpet. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I apologize for the intrusion. I apologize for my son, who is currently drinking himself into oblivion at his club because he is too much of a coward to come here himself. Violet felt her throat tighten. Your Grace. Eleanor. We agreed on Eleanor. The older woman crossed to her, gripping her hands with surprising strength. Listen to me. I have something to tell you, and you must hear all of it before you respond. I do not think... Please. The word was raw, desperate. For me, if not for him. Please. Violet looked at Eleanor's face, at the fear and hope and love written plainly across her features, and found she could not refuse. Very well. Tell me. Eleanor drew a breath. 3 days ago, while you were packing your trunk, Sebastian received a visitor. Charles Weatherton, in person this time, bearing additional documents he claimed proved your deception beyond doubt. More lies. Yes, but Charles did not know that I was listening from the corridor. Eleanor's grip tightened. I heard everything, Violet. Every filthy accusation, every twisted interpretation, every lie dressed up as truth. And I watched my son, my broken, terrified son, ask Charles a single question. What question? He asked, if she wanted my fortune, why did she refuse my first proposal? Violet's breath caught. Charles had no answer. He spluttered and deflected, and eventually admitted that he had not known about the proposal, had assumed Sebastian's courtship was ongoing. Sebastian asked him how he could claim to know your motivations when he did not even know the basic facts of your relationship. Eleanor's voice strengthened with something like triumph. And then Sebastian threw him out, physically. I had never seen my son so angry. That was after I left. Yes. By the time he came to his senses, you were gone. Eleanor released her hands, stepping back. He has been trying to find you ever since. He knows where my aunt lives. He does. But he believes you do not wish to see him. He believes he has destroyed any chance of reconciliation. Eleanor's voice cracked. He told me last night that he deserved to lose you, that your leaving was proof that the universe does not permit him happiness, that he should have known better than to hope. The words hit Violet like physical blows. She thought of Sebastian as she had last seen him wounded, doubting, his marble mask back in place. She thought of what it must have cost him to show her his heart, and how quickly she had walked away when he faltered. I cannot be the one who always forgives, she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. No, you cannot. But you can be the one who gives him a chance to earn forgiveness. Eleanor reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded letter. He wrote this last night. He asked me to deliver it only if I believed you might listen. Violet took the letter with trembling hands. The paper was fine, expensive, slightly crumpled, as though it had been written and rewritten multiple times. Her name was scrawled across the front in Sebastian's cramped handwriting. I will leave you to read it in private. Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused. Whatever you decide, Violet, know this: you changed him. The man he has become in your presence is the man I always knew he could be. And if you choose not to return, he will survive. But he will not be the same. He will freeze again, and this time, I do not think he will ever thaw. She left without waiting for a response. Violet stood alone in the parlour, the letter heavy in her hands. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, her heart beat a rhythm of fear and hope, and something that felt dangerously like second chances. She opened the letter. Violet, I have written this letter 17 times. Each version was worse than the last, too formal, too desperate, too full of excuses that explain nothing. So I will simply say what is true, and hope that truth is enough. I failed you. When Charles presented his evidence, I should have laughed in his face. I should have trusted what I knew of you over what he claimed to prove. Instead, I let fear consume me. And in my weakness, I hurt the person I love most in the world. I could offer explanations. I could tell you about Edward, about my father, about every betrayal that taught me to expect the worst from people. I could explain how the terror of losing you made me grasp at any reason to push you away first. But explanations are not excuses, and nothing excuses what I did. You asked me once if I was capable of trusting. The answer is yes, but only with you. You are the only person who has ever made me believe that vulnerability might not destroy me. And when that belief was tested, I failed the test. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not asking for another chance. I am simply asking you to know that I love you, that I will always love you, that whatever happens next, meeting you changed everything. If you never wish to see me again, I will respect that. I will not write again, will not pursue you, will not make your life more difficult than I have already made it. You deserve peace, and if peace requires my absence, I will give you that. But if there is any part of you that believes we might still have a future, any possibility, however small, I will spend the rest of my life earning your trust. Not because you require it, but because you deserve it. Because you deserve a man who chooses you without hesitation, who trusts you without doubt, who loves you without fear. I am not that man yet, but I want to be. For you. Because of you. Whatever you decide, thank you. For seeing me when I was invisible. For challenging me when I was frozen. For loving me when I was certain I was unlovable. You made me feel alive again. I will never forget that. Yours, in whatever way you will have me. Sebastian. Violet read the letter 3 times. The first time, she could barely see through her tears. The second time, she traced each word with her finger, feeling the pressure of his pen strokes, imagining him hunched over his desk in the small hours of the morning. The third time, she read it aloud, hearing his voice in every carefully chosen phrase. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was simply telling the truth. She thought about what Eleanor had said, that fear could be overcome, that a moment of weakness was not the same as fundamental betrayal. She thought about her own walls, her own defenses, the years she had spent convincing herself that hope was her enemy. She thought about Sebastian's face when he had told her he loved her, the raw vulnerability, the terror and the joy intertwined. She had walked away from that face, had left him alone in his study with Charles's lies and his own doubts, had not stayed to fight, had not given him the chance to choose correctly. He had failed her. But perhaps she had failed him too. Aunt Millicent appeared in the doorway. Well? Violet looked up, decision crystallizing in her chest. I need a carriage. Her aunt smiled. The rain had finally stopped by the time Violet arrived at Thornfield House. The streets gleamed with reflected gaslight, puddles turning to mirrors that doubled the world. The butler's face showed no surprise when she appeared on the doorstep, wet-hemmed and dishevelled. He simply stepped aside, as though he had been expecting her. His Grace is in the study, Miss Ashby. Shall I announce you? No. Violet was already moving. I will announce myself. The study door was closed, light seeping from beneath it. Violet stood before it for a long moment, her hand raised to knock, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Then she pushed the door open and walked in. Sebastian was slouched in a chair by the fire, a glass of brandy dangling from his fingers, staring at nothing. He looked terrible unshaven, hollow-eyed, his cravat hanging loose around his neck. The marble mask was gone entirely, replaced by something raw and wounded. He looked up when she entered. For a moment, he simply stared, as though unable to believe his eyes. Violet? You wrote me a letter. He set down the brandy glass, rising slowly to his feet. I did not expect you to come. I know. She crossed the room, stopping an arm's length away. I read what you wrote. I read it 3 times. And I realized something. Violet drew a breath. I have been so afraid of being hurt again that I ran at the first sign of trouble. I gave you no chance to recover, no opportunity to choose correctly. I left because leaving was easier than staying and fighting. You had every right to leave. Perhaps, but that does not mean I was right to go. She stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat. You failed me, Sebastian. Your doubt hurt me more than I can express. But I failed you too. I asked you to be perfect, and when you proved human, I fled. Sebastian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Violet, I do not want a man who never doubts. I want a man who doubts and chooses me anyway. I want a man who struggles and fails and gets back up. She reached out, her fingers brushing his jaw. I want you. Imperfect, wounded, still learning to trust. I want all of it. I do not deserve, neither do I. But here we are anyway. Violet smiled through her own tears. Ask me again. Sebastian stared at her. What? Ask me again. The question you asked at the house party. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He dropped to his knees right there on the study floor, taking her hands in his face upturned with an expression of such hope and fear that it broke her heart and healed it in the same moment. Violet Ashby, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Will you marry me? Not because I deserve it, I do not. Not because I am certain I will never fail you again. I cannot promise that. But because I love you more than I have ever loved anything. And I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you. Violet looked down at him, at this proud, broken, beautiful man, kneeling before her with his heart in his hands, and knew that she had finally found her answer to every question that had ever haunted her. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Sebastian surged to his feet, pulling her into his arms with desperate strength. His lips found hers, and the kiss was fire and salvation and homecoming all at once. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying. I thought I had lost you, Sebastian whispered against her temple. I thought you nearly did. We nearly lost each other. Violet pulled back to look at him, wiping the tears from his cheeks with gentle fingers. But we didn't. We're here. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the fire burned low and the night deepened around them. There would be time later for explanations, for conversations, for the hard work of building trust. There would be obstacles and difficulties and the inevitable complications of 2 wounded people learning to love. But for now, there was only this 2 hearts beating in tandem, finally brave enough to hope. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the Thornfield Chapel. It was a small affair, intimate by aristocratic standards, only 50 guests, most of them close friends and family. Eleanor had campaigned vigorously for a grand cathedral ceremony, but Sebastian and Violet had held firm. They wanted their union to be about connection, not spectacle. The chapel was ancient, its stone walls softened by centuries of prayer and candlelight. Spring flowers filled every available surface, roses and peonies and lavender, their scent mingling with beeswax and old wood. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting patterns of colour across the worn flagstones. Violet stood at the back of the chapel, her hand on her aunt's arm, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy and terror. "Ready?" Aunt Millicent asked. "No," Violet laughed, slightly breathless. "But I am going anyway." "That is courage, child. The only kind that matters." The music began, not the traditional wedding march, but a piece Sebastian had commissioned specifically for this moment, soft and haunting, and full of longing. Violet took her first step down the aisle. Sebastian waited at the altar, Eleanor beside him, his grey eyes fixed on Violet with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was impeccably dressed, his dark hair actually trimmed for once, his face clean-shaven and handsome. But it was his expression that undid her. He was crying, openly, unashamedly, tears streaming down his face as he watched her approach. The marble duke, weeping with joy in front of 50 witnesses, and not caring in the slightest what any of them thought. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and she felt the tremor that ran through his entire body. "You came," he whispered. "I will always come." She squeezed his fingers. "Where else would I be?" The vicar began the ceremony, his words flowing over them in familiar rhythms. Violet heard very little of it. She was too focused on Sebastian's face, on the way he looked at her like she was the sun after endless winter, on the warm pressure of his hands in hers. When it came time for the vows, Sebastian spoke first. "I, Sebastian Ashworth, take you, Violet, to be my wife. I promise to love you not perfectly, but completely. I promise to trust you, even when trust terrifies me. I promise to choose you every day, in every moment, through every doubt and fear that tries to come between us." His voice cracked slightly. "I promise to be the man you deserve, even when I fail, because you taught me that failure is not the end. It is only the beginning of trying again." Violet's own vows came out steadier than she expected. "I, Violet Ashby, take you, Sebastian, to be my husband. I promise to love you as you are, not as I wish you to be. I promise to stay when staying is hard, to fight when fighting is necessary, to forgive when forgiveness is needed. I promise to see the man beneath the marble every day for the rest of our lives." She smiled through her tears. "And I promise to keep you from becoming too comfortable. You are far more interesting when you are challenged." Laughter rippled through the chapel. Sebastian's face split into a grin that transformed him entirely. "I would expect nothing less." The vicar pronounced them married. Sebastian kissed her with all the passion and tenderness he had been holding back, and the chapel erupted in applause. Eleanor was sobbing openly, her handkerchief inadequate to the task. Aunt Millicent dabbed at her eyes with dignified restraint. Even the vicar looked moved, but Violet barely noticed any of them. She was too busy looking at her husband, and marveling at the impossible journey that had brought them here. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too." Sebastian pulled her closer. "Forever. Forever is a very long time. Not long enough." The wedding breakfast stretched into afternoon, then evening, the celebration taking on a life of its own. Guests danced and drank and offered endless toasts to the couple's happiness. Eleanor held court among her friends, accepting congratulations with the smugness of a woman whose scheme had succeeded beyond her wildest hopes. As evening deepened into night, Sebastian and Violet slipped away from the party, stealing through the gardens toward a quiet corner where an old stone bench overlooked the rose beds. "Your mother is insufferable," Violet observed, settling onto the bench with a sigh of relief. "She has told the story of our first meeting approximately 17 times. Only 17. She is showing remarkable restraint." Sebastian sat beside her, pulling her close. "She has been planning our wedding since the morning after the Harrington ball. She told me." Violet leaned into his warmth. "She also told me she knew from the moment we met that I was exactly what you needed." She was right, as usual. Sebastian pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I would prefer if you did not tell her I said so. Her head is quite large enough already." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. The sounds of the celebration drifted faintly from the house music and laughter and the clink of glasses raised in toast. "I used to hate stars," Violet admitted quietly. "They reminded me of all the wishes I had made that never came true, all the hope I had wasted on impossible things. And now? Now I think perhaps some wishes just take longer to come true than others." She looked up at him, at the face that had become more precious to her than breath. "I wished for you, Sebastian. I did not know it at the time, but I was wishing for exactly this." Sebastian's arms tightened around her. "I did not wish for anything. I had stopped believing that wishing did any good." His voice was rough with emotion. "But if I had wished, if I had believed it was possible, I would have wished for you. For this. For a woman brave enough to love me despite everything. We are both very fortunate, then." "We are." He tilted her chin up, capturing her lips in a kiss that promised everything. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making certain you never doubt that fortune." They returned to the celebration eventually, hand in hand, faces flushed with more than champagne. Eleanor beamed at them from across the ballroom. Aunt Millicent raised her glass in silent salute. The marble duke danced with his new duchess until the small hours of the morning, and if guests remarked on how thoroughly transformed he seemed, how he smiled, how he laughed, how he looked at his wife as though she had hung every star in the sky, well, that was only to be expected. Love, after all, had a way of changing everything. 7 years later. The Harrington ball blazed with the same 1,000 candles Violet remembered from that first fateful evening. The crystals caught the light and scattered diamonds across the cream-coloured walls. The music swelled, the dancers swirled, but everything else had changed. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching the crowd, a small smile playing at her lips. 7 years. It seemed both an eternity and no time at all. "Mamma!" A small whirlwind in pale blue silk attached herself to Violet's skirts. "James put a frog in my slipper again." Violet looked down at her daughter, 5 years old, russet-haired, possessed of a temper that rivaled her mother's, and felt her heart expand with familiar love. "Did he? How very ungentlemanly of him. I told him so. I told him he was an absolute beast, and that I would never speak to him again." "And what did he say?" "He said good, because I talk too much anyway." Charlotte's lower lip trembled with righteous indignation. And then Edward laughed, which was worse. Violet knelt, bringing herself to her daughter's level. "Your brothers are very foolish boys who will one day realize that their sister is the cleverest of them all. Until then, you must simply endure their nonsense with grace." "Must I?" "I am afraid so. It is the burden of being a lady." Charlotte considered this, her grey eyes, Sebastian's eyes, bright with calculation. "Could I not simply put frogs in their slippers instead?" "You could. But then Grandmama would give us all a lecture about proper behaviour, and you know how you feel about those." Charlotte shuddered dramatically. "Worse than frogs?" "Exactly. Now go find your brothers and tell them that their father wishes to speak with them immediately." "Does he?" "He will by the time they arrive." Violet kissed her daughter's forehead. "Off with you." Charlotte disappeared into the crowd with the speed and determination that characterized everything she did. Violet watched her go, marveling as she often did at the fierce little creature she and Sebastian had somehow created. "Causing trouble again?" Sebastian appeared at her elbow, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He had barely changed in 7 years, perhaps a few more lines around his eyes, perhaps a touch more grey at his temples. But his eyes were the same, warm and alive and full of love when they looked at her. "Charlotte?" "Always." Violet accepted the champagne with a grateful smile. Though to be fair, James started it this time. James always starts it. He takes after his mother. He takes after his father, and you know it. Violet slipped her arm through his, leaning into his familiar warmth. Though I admit, the temper is all me. They stood together, watching the ball unfold around them. So much had changed since that first evening, when Eleanor had mistaken her for a servant, and Sebastian had dismissed her as furniture. They had buried Eleanor 2 years ago, peacefully, in her sleep, surrounded by the family she had worked so hard to create. They had welcomed 3 children, James, now 7, with his father's dark hair and his mother's sharp tongue. Edward, named for his uncle, 6 years old and quiet in ways that sometimes worried them. And Charlotte, who had arrived screaming and had not stopped since. They had built a life together, a real life, full of joy and difficulty, triumph and failure, the endless ordinary moments that made up a marriage. It was more than Violet had ever dared to hope for. "What are you thinking?" Sebastian asked. "I am thinking about the first time we danced, here, in this very ballroom." "Ah." His arm tightened around her. The dance that meant nothing. The dance that meant everything. Violet looked up at him, her eyes bright with memory. "You were so cold, so determined not to feel anything, and I was so angry, angry at you, angry at myself, angry at the whole ridiculous situation. And yet here we are. And yet here we are." The music shifted, the orchestra beginning a waltz. Around them, couples began to move toward the floor. Sebastian set down his champagne glass, turning to face her with an expression that still had the power to make her heart race. "Dance with me." "Again? We have danced at every ball for 7 years. People will talk." "Let them." He extended his hand. The same gesture he had made that first night, but with all the coldness replaced by warmth. "Dance with me, Duchess." Violet placed her hand in his. On the dance floor, he pulled her closer than propriety allowed, as he always did. His hand was warm against her back. His eyes never left hers. "This dance means nothing," he murmured, echoing words spoken a lifetime ago. Violet smiled, pressing closer, feeling his heartbeat against her own. "Tell that to your mother watching." Sebastian laughed, that full, genuine laugh she had worked so hard to earn, and spun her across the floor. And from somewhere beyond the veil, Eleanor Ashworth watched her son dance with the woman she had chosen for him, and smiled. The story had ended exactly as she had always known it would, with love, with laughter. With 2 broken people who had somehow become whole, and with a dance that had never, not for a single moment, meant nothing at all.